On this episode of the show, I have with me David Petrou. He is founder and CEO of Continua AI, and we're going to be talking about, career paths and, whether you really need them early in a startup's life cycle. And we're going to be talking about the fact that everyone is in it to really succeed at that early startup phase, and you really got to get things done and focus on how to drive productivity and worry about what you have to deliver, less about some of the things larger companies have to deal with and think about, but also I'm sure David has an eye to the future. So we'll dive into this and see how much we can cover. David, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Amir.
Absolutely. All right. Before we dive on in, can you tell everyone what Continua AI does?
Yeah, we've brought the power of AI to group chats. We kind of call this social AI. So if you think about what's gone on in the last few years, it's been absolutely incredible. People are communicating with ChatGPT, getting things done. It's changed the world. But it's all been in this kind of single player mode. I guess you can look at it that way. We think that there's a huge opportunity and a huge value to bring an AI into group conversations. Humans are social beings, and it seems like an incredible opportunity for an AI to help in coordination tasks. You would do less note taking and more concentrating on the human relationships if you know that you have a trusted AI at there ready to come in with the facts and ready to make connections between different ideas, help you plan vacations, help you plan what movie to watch with your significant other. So that's what we're doing at Continua AI.
Absolutely. I think there's a whole episode in us just diving into that if we wanted. So maybe down the road we'll tackle that. And this episode, you're going to be really talking about at the startup level. Everyone is in it to succeed. You have worked, obviously, so I can go look at your background if they want. You've worked at bigger companies, and I've had to deal with, the career path and making sure those career ladders in place early, at their stage of growth, where they're at their life cycle. And when we talk about startups, and obviously everyone kind of knows, there's a lot of unknown, lots of moving variables out there. When you think about career paths and you think about where startups fit, is it vitally important to have something like that in place early, or is it one of those things where that'll just come down the road?
In some ways, it almost depends on what the definition of a startup is, right? Because a startup can be tiny. A startup can be, one person, could be two people. If it's one person, they're probably not managing their own career path. Yes, my startup is 10 people, roughly. So then you have, a company like Anthropic, which technically it's probably still a startup, but, they haven't IPO'd. But that's a ginormous and a wonderfully successful company. At that scale with thousands of people, you have to have certain structures in place. I think a lot about the Dunbar number. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but the number of social relationships that someone can keep in their head at one moment. And I think they talk about this as between 120 and 150 people. When you reach certain levels of scale, you have to start to divide things out, and that could lead to hierarchies in a reporting chain. It could mean having levels for people so that there's almost like a shorthand of understanding what level of complexity a problem somebody can actually deal with. So you're right, Amir, that I've had the opportunity to experience the full spectrum. I was at Google for over 17 years, and when I left, there were 185,000 people there, and now I have Continua, and we're about 10 people.
Absolutely. 100%. Different stages, different timings, different, I guess, even definitions of where startups are within their growth cycle. Obviously, you mentioned you're 10. Early on at that stage, everyone's hands-on. Also product scope, right? I mean, if you do think of an Anthropic, as they're growing, they have different drivers and different types of roles they're hiring for. They have different factors to think about at their growth rate. For a company that's at the 10 headcount size, and you guys are focused on a particular niche, I mean, it's They're trying to get the best out of our text messages, which I think is a very powerful thing. And I'm sure anyone who's out there and has tried to search through their texts, it's not easy. Looking at 10 and looking at the kind of the scale of the product where it's now at, and you think about hiring people to join on, you said everyone's in it to succeed. Obviously, people do want career growth, but if you're joining a 10-person startup, is it fairly expected that some of those things are just not going to be there? That seems like a fairly reasonable thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say a few things here. When we hire at Continua, we put a pretty big premium on, can we actually work together with a given candidate. It's not so much about raw intellectual horsepower or mental artillery. It's also really, really important on can a candidate actually communicate with the rest of the team? And are they able to be additive to the team? I think the team is fantastic. I think that we've been really lucky at Continua to attract the level of talent that we have. But even more than that, it's really it's really a pleasure to come into work every day and know that when something needs to get done, it's going to happen. It's not like it's someone else's problem or someone is siloed saying, okay, this is my area of responsibility. I see a problem and, I'm just going to ignore it. Whenever we see an issue, we figure out, okay, who's the right person to handle it? Let's get on it. Let's not drop the ball. So in some ways, I would say that good things will happen if you have that attitude. I'm reminded of a while ago when my thesis advisor at Carnegie Mellon got tenure. In his speech, when he discussed that was being bestowed upon him, he said, this wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to get tenure. The goal was, I was just trying to do great work. I was just trying to do what I thought was right and do great research and work with great students. And then good things happen. And so I think similarly, that's the sort of thing that you want to hire for. And, I had a chance to see it when Google was a lot smaller when I started. And it's certainly the case that at a startup that's very, very small, like ours, you have to be thinking about the teamwork aspect and less about, levels or advancement or career.
Absolutely. And I guess when you're thinking about, 10-person startup, all hands on deck, and you're trying to hire for that team, trying to ensure you're bringing in the right skill set. Obviously, these are skills that are very in demand across the board right now. I mean, every company seemingly wants the type of people you're probably looking to hire. I think that's what I've noticed here in my seat as a recruiting company owner. When you're thinking about that and you're looking at the type of person that you would like to bring in, some of them do work at Google, some of them work at other 10-person startups. Does it ever factor in your mind that somebody coming from, even if they have the hard skills, coming from the larger orgs might have a transition period to come into a startup and not have some of those frameworks of career ladders and other things that maybe they have been used to? Is that something that even would cross your mind, or is that something you'd have to think about?
Yeah, that's I would say a few things. One is that there's definitely a transition, but not just on, is there a support network regarding career or mentorship regarding career? There's also transition when it comes to just the raw engineering and also the pace, right? So the reason why startups exist is that there are certain ideas best tried in the context of a startup. And that usually means higher risk, usually means something that might be a little bit bolder, something that you need a small team that can focus and move really fast. There are amazing engineers at big tech companies that would be terrible in a startup situation. So I would say that when thinking about people at big tech, part of the analysis that goes into our decision on whether to even extend an offer is this someone that's going to thrive in the kind of environment at a startup? You're not going to have access to, you're not going to have a 50-person build team making sure that the compiler tool chain is totally working. You're going to be doing pip install yourself and figuring out packages and dependencies on your own. So that kind of attitude of, hey, there's a problem, I know I'm a smart person, I can figure it out, that's something that we look for and is sort of a necessity at a startup.
Absolutely. I guess as you kind of have been, building your startup the last couple of years, you mentioned left Google after 17 plus years. When you had to think about your own company, I guess, when you experience something for 18 years, it's kind of, it's the norm. That's what you have lived and breathed. Did you have to put some of that aside, some of the stuff that is only applicable at those large companies that, have X resources, and kind of reframe from the ground up what you would expect your startup to look like? Is there anything you had to kind of adjust from that Google experience? And then maybe the follow-up, just if you wanted to address both in one answer, is what did you borrow? What was it that was transferable for you?
It's a great two-part question. So when you're at a company like Google, and there's a number of great companies, in that category, you can launch something and there's going to be a lot of press. There's going to be a lot of marketing. There's going to be a blog post that 1 million people are going to read. When you're at a startup and you launch something, it just goes into the void, in a sense. You can't expect a sort of bump in traffic or a bump in whatever when you throw it out there. So it's much more about the product-led growth. It's much more about the quality of what you're doing. It's much more about how is it differentiated in solving a real problem. So that would be, one thing that someone might take for granted at a big company, and you have to learn the hard way. There's a lot more work than just building a great product to succeed in a startup. On the flip side, I would say when you're at a startup, you can launch anything at any time, right? At a big company, to launch something might take way more time, might take way more review, might take VPs in different organizations in different time zones locking arms and agreeing, okay, this is what we're going to stand behind this new product or this new feature. So I would say that there's pros and cons, but after almost 18 years of doing it one way, it was time for me to explore the other way.
What's really interesting is you did go through a PhD program, and then you went straight to Google. You saw you probably saw Google through different transitions as well, right? Not a 10-person startup, but you saw different transitions, but part of different product launches. You saw various things in the Google sphere of products, which has to be of a different value when you go start your own company. And when you think about, you kind of covered some of those things where, you're not going to get the press release with 1 million views. You're going to work on really big scale products. I think on the flip side, you kind of walk into startup and maybe there's an opportunity if you're a founder and somebody else out there is, wanting to do something similar, is go, I can pretty much always fall back on those things, right? I know things that work. There's things that you definitely have seen work. Now, if you can scale them down and make them applicable, that could be very valuable. Or as you're scaling and you're getting bigger, you can start pulling on those. And those have got to be industry best practices. There's only Google is definitely one of the elite tech companies out there. When you think about the future and you start thinking, let's say you guys do go from 10 people to 50 to 100 or whatever that trajectory looks like, and you have to start re-envisioning something like a career ladder. Is it something you go from scratch, or do you start leveraging some of the Google stuff or some things maybe that you're going to see from other companies?
So there's a few parts to that. I'll get to what I think the evolution of a career ladder should look like. But first, I would say that at big tech, there's certainly a lot of good patterns that we've learned in terms of technology and engineering. Some of that you have to unlearn when you get to a startup because you don't have the scale of the machinery to deal with. The biggest thing I would say I miss from my time at Google is just the interaction with people to get ideas, going to the micro kitchen, bumping into someone, discussing something that maybe you had an idea in the shower that morning and you're so inspired to build it. So I would say that it's when you go from big tech to a small company, I highly recommend you keep your networks alive, you travel, you see your old colleagues, and you exchange ideas. Really, for me, that's the best part, is coming up with new things and inventing things. When it comes to, okay, as we grow, as we scale, what sort of processes should be in place? Yeah, I think there was a lot of great patterns, more in I would say, the first half of my career at Google, when the decisions around promotion were really distributed out throughout the whole company. You want to avoid promoting people beyond what they're able to do. I think that's called the Peter principle. And so you want to avoid a situation where it's only your direct manager who has full control over whether someone is promoted. It's also really important for things like performance review cycles to be bounded in time. It's the sort of thing that can sort of take up all the time you can imagine. People start writing essays on what they've accomplished, and you get to these anti-patterns where instead of actually moving the needle, you're sort of behaving in your day-to-day job on what you think is going to get you promoted. And that's not good for one's psyche, let alone for the progress of the company. I used to joke that the best time for some kind of hacking attempt or attack on Google to occur would be during Google's performance review cycle, because so many people are focused on that element of their job. But I think it's really tough, and I think that it's a kind of process that you continually have to guard in and ensure that the right amount of time is given to it, but no more than that amount of time.
Absolutely. That's actually pretty interesting. You yourself, I mean, you spent nearly 2 decades at one company, and you go off to become a founder. When you start, and this may be a question for people that are similar situations, because I feel like there's a lot of great engineers at big companies that sometimes hesitate wanting to be a founder for a variety of reasons. You do give up a lot of the things that you probably, those creature comforts as an employee, right? Little things here, little things there, and not just the perks of snacks and benefits, but actual tooling. Like you have a little bit more budget for this, you have a little bit more budget for that, and when you do make that pivot, you personally, when you have to kind of look at some of the decisions you have to make as a founder to make sure the sum of the parts are working really well together, but they have everything they need, but you do have trade-offs. I mean, there's only so much you want to spend in funding for everything at an early stage. Are there things that, I guess, what's the thought process that you have to go through? Did you have to unwire your way of thinking at Google a little bit?
Yeah, so I would say that in terms of tooling, there could be a lot of things that means, right? In the world of machine learning, you often have to have data, and that data has to be labeled, and having that data labeled costs money, and you need a budget for that. So at a startup, you have to be thinking about what are the problems that you can realistically go after, because you have a certain amount of cash and you're burning that cash at a certain rate, and that defines the runway of your company, right? So certain problems are going to be out of bounds for a small startup to do. Whereas in big tech, you can say, okay, we're going to need a certain amount of data. it's going to cost this. You sign your name somewhere, and some department takes care of it and cuts a check, and it's done. Um, there's other, I would say, comforts that I was thinking about when you were stating your question. Um, I think that one of Google's biggest points of retention would be the code base. The Google 3 code base is amazing. It's huge and it's well tested. Um, I'm sure some Googlers that might be listening to this might take issue on how good different parts are, but overall, the quality is pretty darn good. Um, and so you get used to certain things. If I need a certain library to do some kind of graph traversal, okay, you go there, it's going to be there. You can trust that it's going to work. Open source, you have to do a lot of diligence. If you're using the right thing, you have to worry about security holes and things like that. So for some engineers who, what they want to do is produce code of high quality, having Google that code base and then leaving it is a pretty difficult thing. We have a blog at Continua. It's easy to get to, blog.continua.ai. And one of our posts is exactly about the transition when it comes to development, transitioning from big tech to a startup. And it was written by one of our employees, Andrew Hyatt. I'd recommend if developers watching this are interested, they can check that out.
Absolutely. I actually think that's great. I might have to go look at it myself and digest that. And when we're looking at, your employees and getting them to focus on the actual execution, focus on that productivity side. I mean, every employee has way more impact, obviously, being at 10 versus being one of several thousands or even hundreds of different startups. When you do have a smaller startup at 10, that productivity piece, ensuring that everyone's working on the right thing optimally, that's always, especially for a founder, always not easy. You've got a billion other things to do. Obviously, I'm sure you have a very strong technical team, but any technical team is susceptible of getting lost into the weeds very easily. Anything you've seen work for productivity, especially when we're talking about like early stage startups such as Continua?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to always instill throughout the company and everyone's minds how important time is, that every minute counts. And there are certain things that would be nice to do, certain pieces of the code that we should clean up. There are certain routines that could be made more efficient. And this cuts across the board from very minor micro optimization type things to higher level things like what language should we use? Should we refactor this component or this microservice into another language? To endless debates over is the wire format JSON or Proto, and back and forth. It's much better to say, okay, we're going to talk about this briefly, make a decision, and move on. And the decision is the decision. So this also comes into prioritizing what features we work on. It's much better to be, say, let's say, a few degrees off of what optimal is and moving really fast than in a kind of area of indecision where you need 2 weeks to plan something before you can even start moving. So I think that the characteristic of knowing, okay, any of us might be wrong. I'm going to make the ultimate decision and then we're going to move. And then I'll be the first person to admit if my decision was wrong. Everyone understands that, and that enables us to move as quickly as we can and then course correct later. Something else that we do, once every 2 weeks, we have a retrospective on how the last 2 weeks went. And that gives full visibility to everyone on what went well, what didn't go well, what should we change moving forward. So I think that's a really, really good use of time in a startup.
Absolutely. Do you envision, as you guys grow past a certain size. I mean, some of what you described is you can scale it. I mean, it sounds like you certainly can. Obviously, your touch point might change as well as one of the as the founder. But do you envision things changing from that cohesive picture you painted? Is there going to be some things that change, or possibly your goal is to keep some of those cultural engineering aspects in place as long as you can?
I think the most important thing is for the types of problems that we're working on to always be really, really interesting and to be doing things that haven't been done before. That's the best way for people to be excited by what they're doing. It's the best way for us or any startup in our position to hire people, to attract people that we would want to hire. When we scale beyond a certain point, I'm probably not going to have as much time to look at every project individually, but we will have leaders in place that can do that and scale that out for sure.
Absolutely. And I guess maybe final question, because I know you're an AI company, and I feel like if I don't ask something about AI's impact on SDLC in these recordings now, I'm missing out on tapping into every founder's view. When it comes to that side of the house, obviously you guys are building with and around AI. I mean, it's a core of what you're doing. It's a part and parcel of what you're trying to do. When it comes to the actual SDLC and AI tools within that realm, there's so many of them. We won't necessarily name all of them. I guess, where do you guys sit with those type of tools? And just curious.
That's a great question. So it was interesting. I just read an article this morning about how engineers who have been around for a while, maybe have been, coding for 20 plus years, actually do better with some of these tools. And I don't know if we want to get into a definition of vibe coding, because different people have different definitions, but like the original version is essentially you don't even look at the code that it outputs, right? I don't think many people actually vibe code that way. I have a lot of fun with it, but I also ensure that every line that it outputs is something that I've looked at and reviewed. And there's also this notion that the more that you have to, or let's put it this way, the bigger your project gets, the more prompts that you have to do in order to get it to output the thing that actually works, right? So that's a little bit subtle, but I think it's a really important point, which is that initially you can move super, super fast, and it feels like, some veil's been lifted from your eyes and you see the future and you're so excited. When your project then gets to 10,000 lines or whatever, then vibe coding starts to duplicate functions, and it should be refactoring things, but it's not. And it kind of goes off the rails. You have to prompt it more. And then you get into this weird like dopamine thing of, it almost feels like pulling a lever on a slot machine, where you pull it and you get this random reward. Maybe it works, and then 3 times it doesn't work, and then it works twice in a row. And then you spend 4 hours doing that, of typing prompts, looking at the output, when you could have coded the damn thing in 3 hours if you just did it yourself, right? Obviously, the technology is going to get better and better. So in, 6 months from now or 9 months from now, it might be the case that you could just speak into your microphone and code the next feature of your product. I think it's super, super interesting. It's a wonderful time to be alive. I left Google because the rate of change of technology is faster now than I've ever seen in my career. And certain ideas are best explored in the startup environment. And I just think it's incredible what's going on. I just hope that the next generation is as interested in what's going on in this technology as I was way back when computers, when we did not have large language models, because I think that it's just such a pleasurable activity to be able to create something from scratch. And now we have AI sitting next to us to do it. And in many ways, it parallels what we're building at Continua, because while we have AIs that can pair code with you, Continua is about bringing the power of AI to group chats in social settings where it can help you plan things and it can keep notes of things and create Google documents for you. So to answer your question succinctly, I would say, what a time to be alive.
I think that's a great response. And I'm seeing people all over the different parts of the spectrum. I think it's very interesting. And I think there's so many moving parts around this right now, and what people define. I think you called it out right. Vibe coding means something different to every org. And what the definition of production code that is originated from vibe coding and solely originated from vibe coding is something that could be up for debate, because depends what your standards are. I mean, I think there's a gamut, obviously lots of tools, lots of momentum. As you mentioned, the product itself is kind of built with that mindset in mind as well. I know, David, we definitely have gone through a lot of different questions. I'm sure I haven't asked you everything, and I'm sure I've left a follow-up that somebody's going to be like, hey, Amir, you should ask him this or that. Is there a good way of just getting in touch with you if somebody does have a question? I know we covered a lot of areas in particular around your founder experience and your background. Is there a good way of connecting with you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest. So feel free to drop me a line. Besides that, as I said before, we have a blog where we go through a lot of technical details. I know that your viewers are quite technical. So if you're interested in what it takes to build the kind of service that we did, which is far more than a thin wrapper on an existing API, please check it out. And also has that post about the differences between big tech and startups.
Absolutely. Well, we'll make sure to drop a link to that blog as well. David, thanks again for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Amir.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I really hope you guys share this episode with others that might benefit from it. David walked us through his background of being a founder, having that Google experience, and how does that dynamic pair out? I mean, you got to bring some of that experience forward. You got to know which things you want to bring forward and what things you want to leave behind and what things you want to leave for later potentially. And David's had to build a very interesting product in a very dynamic space. And with a 10-person team, he's got to have them all focused and all working in the same direction and get maximum productivity, and super exciting product as well if you guys want to check it out. So share this episode with somebody else who could benefit. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.